Q&A and a very special Q&A to help you start your weekend off this Friday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've gotten started a little bit late, but we will be going for the next 2 hours answering all of your questions related to history and social studies and all of those topics. This is what the Friendly Neighborhood History channel does, and this is what we excel at: friendly neighborhood history in a friendly, neighborly way. And we are celebrating our year anniversary. Our channel officially got started February 18th of 2024, and so we just passed our first birthday. And in order to celebrate that, we are doing a special live stream, a 2 hour long one that we hope you really will enjoy, bringing you thoughtful and relevant history in a friendly neighborhood manner. And I've got new lighting and I got a new seating area and everything in my studio here, where I do a lot of my work, where I did my video, my long form video about Alexander the Great. I am doing 2 long form videos a week that drop every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Good evening. Welcome, Guyan, Spartacus. Good to see you. You are 2 of my favorite friendly neighborhood historians. Welcome to the channel. For the next 2 hours, usually I say just for the next hour, but for the next 2 hours, I will be answering all your questions related to history and social studies and the like. So, whatever topics you have, whatever comments you have, whatever questions you have, I am here to answer them as best as possible. Freshly, great to see you. Angel as well. Hello, welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. And again, we've got a nice long live stream coming at you with all of your questions and answers all of your questions being answered related to history and social studies. And we do this every Friday and Saturday night. Hopefully everyone can hear me and I'm coming in nice and clear. And whatever questions you have regarding history, shoot them in the chat and I will be happy to answer them as succinctly and reasonable a manner as possible. So I'm leaning back, enjoying my new recliner that I've gotten here in the studio and just kind of taking it all in. Grab something to drink, some coffee or water. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. So is that better, Freshly? Freshly Wild's a friendly neighborhood historian. Welcome, Freshly. Good to see you. And my wonderful moderator, M, put the social media handles in the chat. So consider following us on Facebook, Instagram, and X for more content. And yeah. And also feel free to, if you want to delve into some of my more bonus content and some of my behind the scenes stuff, take a look at the Patreon where we have bonus content available, early releases and all of that good stuff for a small fee. I'm doing a series there right now on the First Ladies that I'm really enjoying, and doing a series here on YouTube of short videos about the Chinese imperial dynasties. So we're now coming up with the Tang Dynasty next. So if you like history, social studies, and the like, you're in the right place. This is our AMA where you can ask me anything related to those topics and I will give you the best answer I possibly can. We will be going from now until 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And hopefully this is how you've chosen to start your weekend, and hopefully you've made the right choice. If you like history, you're in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. And you saw it right here from our wonderful Freshly Wild. This is his favorite channel, and it's a reason that it's his favorite channel. So thank you for joining us and everything. And consider liking and subscribing. Any questions or comments or topics you have related to history and social studies, I'm here to answer. And this is how I give back to the channel and all that good stuff. My goodness, I look like a ghost. I've gone so white. But yeah, enjoying my new layout here in my new studio, and I've got the recliner going, and it's really enjoyable. Yep. And if you like, that will help the algorithm. So please consider doing that. But if you have any questions related to history and social studies, I'm here to answer them. That's what we do here, and we have a lot of fun doing it. We've been doing this ever since May of last year, so we'll have to have a birthday for the live streams for this channel at some point. But Guyan was saying in the channel, I know a lot about the Greek and Roman empires, but nothing about the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the first Persian Empire. Yeah, I'm glad you stipulated that the Achaemenid Persians are the first Persian Empire. They used to be called the Medo-Persians because a large portion of the population came from the region of Media, which is in northeastern Iran and areas like that. The Medo-Persians the Achaemenid Persians were an empire that developed kind of overcoming the Neo-Babylonian Empire of Nebuchadnezzar the Great in the and they kind of came to prominence throughout the 6th century, middle of the 6th century BC. So like 550 BC to like 530 BC, that was their rise, especially with Cyrus the Great conquering Babylon in 539 and things like that. And so the Achaemenid Persians were an extremely strong and stable empire that controlled all of the Middle East, the Levant, large sections of Egypt, as well as Turkey, Anatolia, and basically were the juggernaut empire of their day, only to be overthrown by Alexander the Great and his Greeks, who defeated them, and their emperor Darius III, Gaugamela, one of the most famous battles in history, saw those armies defeated. So yeah, there's a quick summary of that empire, one of the first empires to emerge. Yeah, one of the first Persian empires. There would be more. Obviously, there's the Safavid Persians, the Qajar dynasty. Persia has been ruled by a king or ruler called a Shah for an extremely long time, and its history, culture, and religion, the Zoroastrianism, and then later Islam, date back for thousands of years. So Persia has a very intense and complex history, and it's not just Iran, it's a section of Iran that is known as Persia proper, and the language is obviously Farsi, one of the oldest and most respected languages in all of human history. So Persian culture, Persian cuisine, Persian history, all really big parts of all some of my favorites to learn about. And so I'm a European historian by trade with an emphasis with, of course, like many Americans, a large emphasis in US history. But I also love studying and learning about non-Western history, and the Persians and the Middle East and Middle Eastern history is just really fascinating to me. The Mongols actually created an empire out of Persia called the Ilkhanate, which basically absorbed all of the culture of Persia in the late medieval, early modern period, which included Islamic rugs, furniture, geometric designs, architecture, and art, as well as obviously the Islamic religion. That basically the Mongols accepted this and became basically Persian rulers in their own right for centuries. So it's really interesting. And Persia, aka Iran, remains the largest Shiite country in the world. Shiite Islam is the minority compared to Sunni Islam. Most Muslims in the world are Sunni Muslims, but Iran has been the bastion of Shiite Islam for a long time, creating a lot of complexities and tensions with other Middle Eastern states like Saudi Arabia or Syria. So a lot of really fascinating history just about Persia and Iran. But yeah, so happy to talk about it, Guyan. If you like what you're hearing and listening to, then you are in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing. I will be here for the next 2 hours, so we're just getting started, basically. I'm looking at, like I have a watch, even though I don't have one. So. Yeah, ancient history is really awesome. There's a lot to unpack there, which is why I did an entire video on Alexander the Great most recently, and I really, really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. And that just debuted today at 5 p.m. So, yeah, the lighting's really making me look light. Okay, now I look really pink and purple, blue, red. This is a new light. I just got a new one. And yeah, this one's kind of a dancing around one, so it really shines my face up and all of that, but I look like a disco ball, and I'm going to get really distracted by this light, so we'll see how I do for the next hour or so with this. And I'm sorry about the glare coming in from that, but I can't really do much about that. Probably will get some sort of lighting block or black screen behind me, but hopefully everyone's hearing me well and enjoying what I'm talking about so far. So thank you for joining us and spending the early part of your weekend with us at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where I bring you history in a friendly neighborhood manner. And if you like history, then you are in the right place. Really appreciate it. Check out those social media handles. You can follow me on X or Instagram or Facebook, or you can go into Patreon for some more bonus content and become a friendly neighborhood historian who pays, or a best friend historian and get some extra perks there. I will make a video in your honor and dedicate it to you. I Love Music is one of the best Patreonies I have. I've also got M as a Patreonie, Ballet Peace, and some others that have been extraordinarily supportive. And we are, of course, missing our wonderful moderator, Simon the Bunny. Wherever you are, Simon, if you're watching this, I hope you're doing well and hanging in there, and we hope to see you again soon. So let's see here. Freshly Wild, can you speak on the expansion of the USA in 1783? You mean since 1783 or in 1783 specifically? Basically, the United States gets out of the Treaty of Paris in September of 1783, where the British acknowledge that America has a right to be its own independent country. And because they acknowledge that the Americans have the right to be their own country, they decide to give the Americans all the remaining territory that wasn't part of the Canadian territories that they had just won from the French. This area is known as the Ohio River Valley, and there had been fighting during the American Revolution, but this land was basically taken by the Americans after the war, and the British recognized their right to hold on to it. And this forms the American Midwest, as well as the 5 Great Lakes that the U.S. owns to this day. So states like Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, all are taken over by the United States. And this goes southward into areas like Tennessee and Mississippi. And the biggest challenge to American authority here is the Native Americans, who have been promised by the British that they would be able to stay there for as long as they wanted. These Native Americans soon find themselves displaced, as the pattern of basically stripping land away from Native Americans and forcing them to go west now pushes into what is now the American Midwest. It's interesting when you look at a map of the United States today, you obviously think of the middle of a country, and you see areas like the prairie lands of Kansas, Nebraska, North and South Dakota. Those are considered plains territories, and you'd think that was the West. But or the Midwest, the actual Midwest is the areas of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, that region of the country, mainly because that area, when the country was founded, was the Midwest. The far West was the prairie lands and all the way up to the Oregon Territory in the Pacific Northwest, which the Americans knew about but didn't have but didn't obviously own at that time. They would buy that much later on. And yes, please make sure to do what Janet is encouraging you to do and hit that like button and all of that great stuff. It's great to see you, Janet. Thank you so much. She's a longtime friend of the neighborhood historian, as is Freshly Wild, who asked a great question about U.S. expansion. Running Man, great to see you, my main history subscriber. Explain to Trump that Canada is a country. Yes, Donald Trump, if you're watching this, I know you're very busy doing a bunch of other stuff, but if you're watching this, Mr. President of the United States, subscribe and tell everybody about it on Twitter, because I know the power that holds. It got you elected president twice, apparently. But yes, Canada is its own independent country with its own history and culture and doesn't need to be absorbed by the United States. So, Running Man, I'm assuming you're a Canadian, so you're welcome, This neo-expansionist, neo-acquisitiveness that America is taking in is quite interesting to me as a historian. I never thought America would go down this path. Of all the countries in the world that are very acquisitive right now, you'd think that it was China or Russia. Maybe Trump's trying to answer them or just use a negotiating tactic. The idea that he can actually get Canada to become an American colony and basically a state or series of states is really, really, would be really, really difficult to achieve. It is true that Canada's economy and welfare would probably be better suited if the United States did indeed own it, but that there's no desire amongst that by the Canadians. And based on the hockey match last night, they're perfectly happy being independent and doing their own thing. So if you're in Canada, live your best life and don't worry about the United States taking over. It's not going to happen. Greenland, the Panama Canal, maybe even, like, I don't know, parts of Mexico, possible under a Trump administration. Canada, absolute far cry. Okay, this light's distracting me. Let's see what I've got next. Now I've got the red one going in a circle, and that one's weird. Okay, this one's like just like iridescent, and I don't like this one either. Okay, this one makes me want to go to the disco. Disco again, disco. Can I just get white? Oh God, now I look like an angel. That's way, way too bright. Let's turn that down a little bit. Okay, this one's kind of a flashing one. I like this one. I'm not too white in this one. So anyways, yeah. Sorry, just tinkering with the new light that I got here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel in the Friendly Neighborhood History studio, which is around me, and you can see my surroundings and all of that fun stuff. So hopefully you're enjoying the live stream and everything. And if you have any history comments, questions, or topics you would like to bring up, drop them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer. If you're new to the channel, you are in the right place if you like history and social studies, because I'm here to please and answer all of your questions related to social studies. As I take a sip of my coffee, hopefully you've got something nice to drink right now, and it's 5 o'clock somewhere, so if that's more alcoholic than not, go for it. As long as you're 21, please drink responsibly. I found one of the most ironic alcoholic beverages ever the other week that my friend introduced me to, that's a cognac, and it's called Alexander the First Cognac, and it has the picture of the Russian Tsar who famously defeated Napoleon on it. And of course, it's a cognac, so it's made in the cognac region of where? France. Interesting how the French have a cognac like Hennessy or Remy Martin dedicated to a Russian Tsar who is best known for whooping their butts in a war. But hey, I'm not going to judge. It was delicious. And yes, that answers the question. I'm over 21. I try to keep my personal identity as quiet as I possibly can. You got a lot. I mean, even my wonderful moderators, a lot of them don't even know my name, but here they are, nonetheless. Anyways, hopefully the microphone and lighting is turning out all right and everybody's enjoying themselves. But if you have any topics or questions you have related to history or social studies, please drop them in the chat and I will answer them as best that I possibly can. We're 15 minutes in, so we're 1/8 of the way there. He's around 200 years old. Nathan, it's great to see you. Another friendly neighborhood historian. Yeah, on the inside, I'm definitely in my whatever age going on 200 years old. I've got all of the style of that. I've got my Hugh Hefner smoking jacket, my normal attire for these live streams that I really, really very much enjoy. I've got my this is faux leather, but it's nice. It feels good. I like it. It's not as soft or plushy as I would like, but it's okay. I really enjoy it and everything. So there's that. But yeah, and thank you for liking and subscribing for those of you who have. I really appreciate it. But Nithin, good to see you. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or topics you'd like to discuss. Nithin always brings up good stuff, as does Running Man and Freshly Wild and Janet. I love music if he's here. It's always a lot of fun. Em sometimes asks really great questions. So just really appreciate all the support that this channel has and all of the great people who come in and ask all these fun questions and have such fun discussions with me here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. Somebody needs to feed their dog or take it for a walk. I don't know. So my original video that I did on this channel, and I'll hold my microphone so it's not swishing around as much, was me walking my then girlfriend's dogs around the block, and with my hands as shaky as they are, shaking even more because I'm trying to control the leashes and these really big dogs and everything. Um, and I'm talking about the fall of Rome and about the lost cause theory. And I made 2 videos that day, and my hair is all crazy and stuff. And so I re-uploaded that video with my own reaction to it earlier today. And the glow up on the channel has been incredible in the last year, and you guys are mainly responsible for that. And yeah. And Running Man is asking, did humans used to eat only once a day? I've heard that rumor before. I'm not sure if it's true. And sorry, I'm just picking a background that we can all just enjoy. This is, by the way, this background here, which my chair and I are interrupting, is Gaugamela, the great victory of Alexander the Great. But it's not coming up on the screen as much as I would like. Since we're in the spirit of the ancient Greeks, there's a map of ancient Greece. There you see Philip II, Alexander's father, is in Macedon up in the north. And then to the south, you've got Thessaly and Greece, which are conquered by Philip and basically pay tribute to him. And from there, Alexander uses that as his launching pad to conquer the entire world. So, yes, coming to you live from ancient Greece when Alexander is doing his conquests. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. But yeah, humans did used to eat a lot less. I mean, malnutrition was a huge part of the human experience in the past. So, the truth of the matter is, Running Man, that a lot of human beings in different eras ate different things, and part of the reason humans in the past were shorter and didn't live as long was because of malnutrition and lack of access to food sources. So I imagine if people had a very rationed diet, they probably would only eat once or twice a day, and maybe not even a full square meal. So hopefully that answers your question. Em, my wonderful moderator who put the social medias in the chat. Em, if you could do that again, that would help so people can see it up close and personal. They don't have to scroll back. But he is asking a great question. Can you talk about car manufacturing in Detroit and Chicago? So Motown, Motor City, those are all nicknames for Detroit, and Chicago also became popular for that. Chrysler, Chevy, and Ford, obviously, more than anything, because Henry Ford revolutionized not just car making, but all sorts of manufacturing with his creation of the assembly line. Those advancements in the late industrial period in the United States in the early 1900s made Detroit and northern and midwestern cities popular places for destinations. They had more factories, they had more manufacturing opportunities, and as specialization of labor occurred, as there were more resources and availability and more machines and more production because of things like the assembly line, it became more and more lucrative for people to work there. So for Henry Ford raised the wages of his workers because he had such high productivity, he could lower the prices of his products, the car, sell a lot more of them, and also pay his workers a better wage, thus incentivizing them to stay on and work harder. So Henry Ford, fascinating guy. This attracts different groups of people. The major 2 groups that move into these cities to work, especially in the innermost part of the city, the inner city, are African Americans who are leaving their difficult and harsh conditions in the agrarian South, where they are poor sharecroppers, many of them, to work in northern factories where they will experience less discrimination, although there is obviously discrimination and racism. It's just a little bit better than it is in the South. and will also have more opportunities to work in high paying jobs. So, this is why there are large black populations in places like Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York City. These neighborhoods and areas like Harlem in New York or Bed-Stuy are great examples of African Americans moving north in the beginning of the 20th century, settling down and creating neighborhoods and areas where they feel more welcomed and feel they have more economic opportunity than they did in the South. It's not perfect, it's not great, it's really, really hard compared to most white people's experiences at that time, but it's better than what they had in the South. Another group of people that is highly incentivized to work in these areas are immigrants. Many of these immigrants come from Eastern Europe, Polish people, Jews, um, people fleeing the Russian Empire and stuff like that, who settle in these areas and work in for very low wages in these inner cities in their own neighborhoods, which are usually called ghettos. But a lot of them by the time you get to the car manufacturing days of the 1910s and 20s, there is far more, like I said, economic opportunity for people to work in these factories, and they get a much more steady income and can live much better lives because of it. And as people develop more economic repertoire and revenue from working in these different factories in these different cities, they decide that they don't want to live in the inner city anymore. When they can afford it, they move to the outer parts of the city where they can commute by bus or car, thanks to Henry Ford and the manufacturing industry, into the city, creating the suburbs. So the suburbs are created after the city is invented, and the city has been around for thousands of years. But the modern industrial city is created before the modern idea of the suburban landscape. So hopefully, that answers your question. Because we don't have a hugest crowd in the world, I'm able to go into a lot more detail and answer a lot more questions, and I really appreciate that. And he has my X, my IG, my Facebook, my Patreon, where you can watch more bonus content and early releases and access all of that. So consider becoming a Patreon subscriber. You can subscribe for free, but there are some paywalls for some extra stuff that is fun, like my series on the First Ladies that I'm really loving doing, talking about some of the most important and interesting women in U.S. history. Substack articles. If you don't like the sound of my voice, but you like the way I talk about history, or you just want to learn about different things, and you want more of my cultural emphasis and ideas and some of my historical opinions, go and read my Substack articles. I'm posting one every day from now until the end of the weekend as we celebrate our 1 year anniversary here, our birthday at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. And yes, inquiries are welcome on my email where you can come and ask me anything. And if you want to go into more detail or you want to challenge me or give me feedback or ideas, I'd love to see you on at Friendly Neighborhood History1 at gmail.com, asking me whatever you would like there as well. Want to go into more detail? We welcome all and any type of feedback. And a lot of people are surprised when I deal with trolls in the chat or people who really don't like the channel or want to throw shade at me. Uh, are surprised that I don't let it bother me. I try not to let it bother me, and I only respond when I absolutely feel that I have to, and I think it would be funny or interesting to do so. The worst example I've ever gotten on the channel was someone who really hated my perspective about Native Americans, that despite all of the horrible things that Native Americans have had to endure, and First Nations people in Canada, and the Aborigines in Australia, and the Maori in New Zealand, and on I can go, that these people actually did not suffer what we could traditionally call a genocide by the definition of a genocide, like the Holocaust or the Holodomor, where Stalin killed millions of people, starving them to death in Ukraine and Russia. But the Native Americans were victims of war crimes and crimes against humanity and all sorts of horrible things, but were not necessarily subject to genocides the way we understand genocides in the 20th century phraseology of it. And so, because of that, I got a lot of heat from one guy who was extraordinarily upset and extraordinarily frustrated, and he went on to different videos and kind of gave me shade everywhere about what a phony historian I was and how I didn't know what I was talking about. And it was all because he disagreed with my opinion. And he did some fact checking that was right, and he did some fact checking that was wrong. And I invited him to come onto the live stream and ask any questions about this, and that we could have a back and forth and a good talk. And he refused to do it. So I guess he wasn't that sure of his opinion. I don't know. Um, Freshly, was Gadsden a person? Yes. Louis Gadsden, I think, was his name, and he was the U.S. ambassador to Mexico in the 1850s, and he completed the Gadsden Purchase, which filled out that lower part of Arizona and New Mexico on the U.S. map, thus giving America its final lower 48 form. It hadn't yet bought Alaska or annexed Hawaii. It would buy Alaska in the 1860s and annex Hawaii after basically subverting the Native Hawaiian government in the 1890s in a huge atrocity to the Native Hawaiians and Queen Luilua Kalani, say that 3 times fast, in 1894, from about 1890 to about 1898. How do you define what? How do you define genocide? Um, yeah, genocide is the systematic killing of a group of people based on their ethnicity. It comes from the technical definition comes from side, which is usually used for murder, like fratricide or homicide, suicide, dare I say, and genos, meaning group of people. Um, yeah. Caleb, great to see you. Is it possible Hitler was so effed up due to the fact that he was inbred? I've heard that before. I've also heard that his father was Jewish and abused his German mother, and that was what caused his psychological break. I don't know about that. Hitler was really messed up, but so were a lot of people around him. He might have just been the most messed up in the bunch. And it's always the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. Um, yeah, freshly. I wish they did teach us stuff like that. I feel I really enjoy it and I have a lot of fun learning about it. Um, yep, Kevin, thank you so much. I love it. I love you doing the background. The background's fun for me. I can change it up. It's a new feature here. It's just kind of blurry with my background and everything. Yeah, I've Israel has a right to rescue their citizens from capture. Freshly Wild is saying. Yeah, you won't hear me disagree from that with that. I don't like. I also have gotten heat a lot on this channel in live stream and in videos and all stuff when people say that Israel is committing ethnic cleansing or genocide. I watched a Candace Owens video because I was stupid today that basically said Israel is guilty of ethnic cleansing. No, that's not how ethnic cleansing works. If that's the case, then every single war has ethnic cleansing in it. I'm sorry. That's just historical ignorance is going to historical ignorance. Um, Caleb saying Hitler was Jewish because his family was Jewish. I've heard that before. I just don't see any evidence that Hitler was actually Jewish. So I'm just not sure on that note. But yeah. But thank you. Good stuff. I appreciate everybody with their comments and their feedback and everything. I'm running low on battery, so I may have to unplug my microphone in order to charge it. So if it doesn't come in as clearly, I apologize for that. But hopefully, you're liking us visiting you from ancient Greece. And this is all to plug my Alexander the Great video. I have decided that I want to do long form content on the channel twice a week. So I'm doing it Mondays and Fridays, dropping at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it technically dropped like 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago in a live premiere. So go back and watch that when you're done watching this, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Nafin is asking, does the current U.S. administration and foreign policy might change the world order in the long time, and how does the MAGA movement change the conservative ideas like the fast changes in the 1960s? A great question, Nathan. I really appreciate that. That's two really good questions. So America is becoming more neo-isolationist, is what I call it. And isolationism is an idea that every country starts off with. The default of every nation, when it originally is developed out of the ethnos or the people who live in it, the ethnic group, is isolationism, taking care of themselves and assembling themselves. When I doing this video about Alexander the Great and learning about ancient Greece, obviously a little bit more than I did before, I find it fascinating that basically the unification of the Greek people is what made them extraordinarily formidable, but they had internal domestic issues that kept them from becoming a cohesive bunch. And so, as the United States developed, as countries develop and become more powerful, they begin to develop these ideas of um, not just interest in themselves, in becoming self aware of their own existence and the need to be united as one country. They also become extraordinarily interested in what is happening around them. And they become self aware and self conscious of the countries surrounding them. So, the US had the luxury of being kind of isolated by the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans from being aware of what was happening in Europe or Asia. But it was aware of a large number of immigrants coming, and for the reasons for immigration, including the decentralization of power in areas like China that was being manipulated by the British, or the pogroms against Jewish people in Eastern Europe that led them fleeing the Russian Empire and coming to the United States. So the United States was aware of these things, but only because of its own domestic issues. And then in the early 1910s, obviously took a stake in world affairs. I think the current administration's neo isolationist policy is basically a referendum that takes America back to the 1920s, where President Trump seems to want America to not focus on external issues because things just don't seem to go well when we do that. Yes, it won us two world wars. And speaking us as an American, I'm not necessarily aligning myself with anyone here, but it doesn't seem to be working recently with things like Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And so the US should keep its big conk out of other issues. And that's the whole motive of neo isolationist policy. Um, And meanwhile, the MAGA movement itself is bringing isolationism and protectionism, which is it's basically a level of national insularity, where a country is far more interested in its own affairs than it is in the affairs of the areas around it, and therefore it's protecting its own trade interests. It's protecting its own manufacturing interests. That's why protectionist tariff policies are becoming more and more popular, and it's seeking to solve its own domestic issues as much as it can before it even considers or reconsiders joining the international fray. And that is exactly what's going on. The only aberration from this is Trump's policy regarding Israel, in which he basically wants to turn Gaza into Trump Gaza. Uh, so we'll see what happens there. Caleb, Lewis and Clark had radioactive stool because the mercury from Dr. Rush's bilious pills couldn't be absorbed by their bodies. So the trail they went on is radioactive spots on this ground. That's really fascinating. I did not know that, and I'm not surprised. Mercury has long been used for in medication and things like this, even though it causes mood swings, temper, all of those horrible things. So yeah. I mean, many people believe Ivan the Terrible, the Russian Tsar, who was known for his tyrannical behavior and anger outbursts and for killing his own son because he was too busy defending his wife's honor, um, may have been because of Mercury and his mood swings. So there's that too. Yeah. Let's see here. I may have to change my location because of my battery. We'll see how I hold on to that for now. But if you are liking what you're hearing, if you're enjoying the history stuff, may I consider liking and subscribing, the Patreon, the X, the Instagram, all of that great stuff where we have bonus content for you. You can become a friendly neighborhood historian there or a best friend historian on Patreon and access a bunch of exclusive content and things like that stand behind the paywall, such as my series on the First Ladies and early releases of all of my videos. So consider joining there. You can join for free and get some extra bonus stuff as well that I enjoy making. And yeah, so there's also Substack where if you want to read my articles and hear the machinations of my mind, instead of hearing the machinations of my mind, read the machinations of my mind, consider the Substack as well. So let's see here. Does anyone have a question, a topic, or a comment they would like to bring up that I could talk about here during our special 1 year anniversary of the Friendly Neighborhood History channel and our 2-hour live stream? No, I haven't met a historical figure. I mean, I've met a few celebrities here and there, but I haven't met a historical figure. Um, but I would love to. That's a good question. I like the questions that are a little more casual and don't require. I met Mermaid Man, Ernest Borgnine. He was signing his books at a local bookstore, and I went and got my book signed by him and met him. And he did the whole evil thing. He was really cool. It was fun meeting him. Whatever celebrities, but yeah, and that's a celebrity from like the 50s and 60s, which is cool for me because I love old movies and classic stuff like that. But also, obviously, well known to my generation because everybody loves SpongeBob. Who doesn't love SpongeBob? Am I right? I just love this. I was talking about Hitler and his Jewish ancestry a few minutes ago, and now I'm talking about freaking SpongeBob. It's amazing the questions we come up with and the things we talk about here. Thank you, Caleb. I really appreciate you asking about that. And I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being serious. So now we play the waiting game. Yeah, he died in 2012. I think he was like 95 or 94, but he'd been doing the SpongeBob stuff for a long time. Yeah, he was up there. Ernest, I'm talking about the time I met Ernest Borgnine for those of you who are just coming in. But this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel where we answer and talk about history at a friendly neighborhood manner. So please consider dropping a comment or topic or a question in the chat, and I will answer it in a timely manner and a friendly neighborhood manner. And if you like history and social studies, then you are in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing. Hopefully, I'm coming in clear with the mic. Any problems? Any problems with the mic? And yes, we are coming to you live from ancient Greece. This is my background. This is one of the photos I used in my video about Alexander the Great that I made that debuted at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as did this live stream, which is supposed to be a 2 hour long live stream Q&A where I answer all your questions related on history and social studies related things and the like. I will be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to answer even more questions. So if you want to come and have more history questions or you think about topics you'd like to discuss, join us then 7 p.m. Yeah, 7 p.m. Eastern. No, we moved that back. It's actually 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Times on Saturdays. Um, so yeah, join us 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time Saturdays. That was the original time when we started that live stream. That was our first live stream, and that was every Saturday a Q&A where you could ask me anything about history. Um, yeah, and hopefully you'll really enjoy that. And then Sundays we have our live stream lecture at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time where I instead of answer excuse me again. Instead of answering questions, I actually talk about a particular historical topic, and the way that was born is we used to have only one live stream Q&A. Kurt Cobain's birthday was yesterday. Rest in peace. I do a rest in peace video, a born today video, and a daily history video, like what happened on this day every day. So really enjoy making those. Those are a lot of fun, and I like get up and I get those out of the way, and then I can kind of go and do more stuff with the channel, kind of random videos, things, working on series. My next video on Chinese history will probably come out this weekend, and it's going to be about the Tang Dynasty, which is the next major Chinese imperial dynasty following the Han, which were the contemporaries of the Roman Empire. So, anyways, we had Saturdays, and then eventually people were asking so many great questions. They're like, "Do we have to end it after an hour?" And I'm like, "No. Why don't we just add a session?" So we did Saturdays and Sundays, and that was our Q&A and Ask Me Anything. And then eventually we added in um, Friday nights as well, and we did Friday night, Saturday night. And I noticed all the topics that I wanted to talk about during the live streams, in case they got dead air, we could never get to because we had all these great questions. So instead, we started doing the live stream lectures on Sundays, and those have been a lot of fun where I get to talk about a particular topic. So I'm seeing David. Thank you for joining us. Caleb's got some stuff here. What about this summer or spring? M is asking favorite historical movie that is both cinematographically excellent and historically accurate. Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, Braveheart's a lot of fun. Schindler's List is extraordinarily powerful. I think that one's very accurate. I don't think it's a complete depiction of the Nazis. They weren't necessarily crazy. These were ordinary people trying to live ordinary lives in the most disgusting and despicable ways possible, which is what should really frighten us. Not Spielberg's idea that the Nazis were a bunch of crazy lunatics, but the idea is that the Nazis were as normal and as nice as you or I might be if we crossed each other on the street. And that's disturbing. And these guys took their families to church on Sundays, paid their taxes, and seemed like nice, friendly guys. And during the week, they did despicable things to countless numbers of people. Um, so yeah, I think those two, the mid '90s had just this cavalcade of amazingly fun and interesting historical fiction movies. Like in 1994, 1995, you got Rob Roy, you've got Schindler's List, you've got Braveheart, and you've got Forrest Gump, which isn't historical but is obviously a movie shrouded in the history of America in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So those are some of the ones I would definitely recommend to the channel. I want to do a series on them, going over them, reviewing them, stuff like that. Gladiator is pretty good. Gladiator 2 needs a lot of work. I love the Marcus Aurelius Commodus thing. It didn't do enough with Commodus as his own gladiator, though, because in real life, Commodus believed he was the best gladiator ever. And obviously, the general is not a real person in real life. So there you go. Gladiator isn't fully accurate. But I've grown in my attitude towards that rather than demanding that a movie be 100% historically accurate about everything and be more realistic to the real life. I'm just glad that it introduces the person to that historical topic and I get to make a video myth busting it because a lot of myths come out of these historical videos and movies and media, such as Birth of a Nation, which was in 1915 D.W. Griffin's breakthrough movie that was screened in the White House, which showed the Confederates and the KKK as these virtuous and good-hearted men who wanted to protect their country, which is malarkey. So historians get to go in and reanalyze these materials and look at them through a different lens and say, hey, this is actually really bad for this reason, that reason, and another reason. So, David, bro, has been ages. How's UFO? How going, you government being honest about Roswell yet? From what I understand, the U.S. government isn't really talking much about UFOs and stuff like that, which I think it seems weird because the Trump administration seems like the administration with that libertarian enough of a bent and, and enough conspiracy theories to fill a truck full of them to actually start talking about this and bringing it to light. And at this point, I'm starting to think to myself, there are no conspiracy theories. There's just theories. And there's a spectrum of how believable they are or not. Caleb, random fact about Mao was he was that. Yeah, it's possible that he was. I wouldn't be surprised at all. He certainly had the power and the capability of starving tens of millions of Chinese people during the Great Leap Forward and then brutalizing people who had once been his closest allies and advisors during the Cultural Revolution. So anyone who is a brutal dictator, for me, is capable of anything, be they Hitler, Mao, Stalin, any of these guys. What about Hamburger Hill? That's from Korea, if I'm correct, right? Um, Should the Geneva Convention be adhered to in the 21st century warfare? I mean, it's the reason they made up the Geneva Convention, and Geneva is obviously a city in Switzerland, which is famous and notorious in many ways for its neutrality. The Geneva Convention was made up because they didn't want to fight a war as brutal as World War One. That's why they banned things like mustard gas and things like that. They found the war to be uh, critically heartbreaking when modern technology was used in such horrifying ways. Yeah, that's right. Vietnam was in Hamburger Hill was in Vietnam. But basically, the Geneva Convention was a set of guidelines for how people should fight wars without brutalizing each other and whilst trying to save as much human civilian life as possible, which is why in the next war, World War II, the US invented the idea of dropping leaflets to warn people of bombings and other things. Unfortunately, they didn't do enough of this at Dresden, Hiroshima, or Nagasaki. Um, yeah, that's definitely true. Loads of Americans at Hamburger Hill. That was one of those battles in Vietnam. I think was that during the Tet Offensive? I'm not particular on the exact battle itself, but I have heard and read about it before. But it's one of those battles where the American media showed how weak the American efforts in Vietnam were actually. And despite the fact that the Americans actually won all of the conflicts at the Tet Offensive, the American media showed the brutality and suffering of of the Vietnamese people, the corruption of the South Vietnamese government the U.S. was trying to prop up, and the ineffectiveness of the Americans to fully eradicate the Viet Cong, which were South Vietnamese fighters in South Vietnam being aided by the North, which eventually led to Americans turning against the war. And Richard Nixon, the next president, his solution to that was to basically attack the North, Cambodia and Laos, bombing a bunch of countries in order to destroy as much of the North Vietnamese military as possible and to win the war, try to win the war, or at least get some sort of admirable stalemate out of it. This probably would have been achievable had Nixon stayed in office. The Watergate scandal and everything basically brought him out, and afterwards, the North Vietnamese were able to overwhelm the South with the fall of Saigon in 1975, and the U.S., who had already pulled out of the war 2 years earlier, were helpless to stop it. So, interestingly enough, as much damage as he had done, Nixon actually brought about the end of the Vietnam War, both through his political activity, but also through basically being booted out of office and not being able to go back in militarily when the North Vietnamese went into Saigon in 1975. Yeah, David, I'm so glad that you are here. I will keep doing everything I can. David's a long time uh, friendly neighborhood historian. So, heads up, George Washington and Steve Irwin and Drew Barrymore and Robert Wadlow and Nikki Lowdy all have birthdays tomorrow. Oh, geez, I've got a lot on my plate tomorrow. Obviously, George Washington is the big one. Technically, his birthday was February 11th because they were using Julian calendars, but it's February 22nd. Drew Barrymore, obviously part of the huge Barrymore family. Lionel John, I think she's descended from Lionel Barrymore. These really, really amazing American actors and actresses who have dominated American movies and cinema for almost a century. Sturve Irwin is the crocodile hunter who was part of my childhood in a big way, the Australian good mate who did a lot of good, who had a channel on the Animal Planet, became an international sensation, and then was tragically stung and killed by a stingray when he was only 44. Robert Wadlow, if that name sounds oddly familiar, it's because you might have ran into him in a crazy facts thing. He's technically the tallest man ever recorded. I know there's rumors of Nephilim and large giants all throughout all of human societies, which means it's probably likely that there were giants bigger than Robert Wadlow in years past in ancient history and prehistory. But Robert Wadlow, I think, was 7'8" and or 8'7" or something. He had some sort of genetic deformity, and he died when he was like 26. But he was extremely tall. I think he was 8'7" or something like that. Just amazing. Niki Lauda. I don't know who Niki Lauda is, but yeah, I do a video every day with today's birthdays, to rest in peace today, and daily history, where I talk about the people who were born, the people who died, and the history of that day, respectively. And it's a lot of fun to do, and it brings a lot of eyes to the channel. And I was talking about communism a lot today, because today is the anniversary of the creation of the Communist Manifesto. I also do bonus episodes of that on the Patreon. So if you subscribe to the Patreon, even as a free member, you will probably see my bonus episodes where I talk about more historical figures who were born on this day, or people who died on this day who I didn't talk about on YouTube. Today is the birthday of Nina Simone, so I hope you're all feeling good this Friday night. And I welcome you to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. If you like history and enjoy, as I reach for my coffee awkwardly, enjoy learning about social studies and the like, consider liking and subscribing. You're in the absolute right place. I'm running low on battery, so we'll have to recharge in a minute or two. But yeah, and please like and subscribe and all of that. And if you have any topics, questions, or comments related to history or social studies, please drop them in the chat, and I will answer them in as soon as I possibly can. And I've got my background. I am joining you from ancient Greece, where I did my long form video like I do every Friday now. This one about Alexander the Great. Let me see here. So, does anyone have any more questions, comments, all of that good stuff? History of prayer beads. Okay, so Emma's asking about this. I'm assuming you are referring to the rosaries, which are probably the most famous prayer beads in the West. Hindus also use different types of prayer beads, and so do Muslims. And a lot of people think that the Muslims actually created the Catholic rosary, which is fascinating because the Catholic Church predates Islam by centuries. Um, it's a rhythmic form of prayer. It's enabled to people to be able to keep up the repetitions that they are making and keep a pattern going on. And it seems to be one of those things in history where it's common throughout different cultures and religions. So there's obviously a power and important tactfulness to it, about feeling and touching um, what you are praying about, and reminding yourself to pray in those ways. And obviously, the most famous form of this is indeed the Rosary of the Catholic Church, which includes many prayers to Mary, as well as some to Jesus. In Islam, I don't know what the prayer beads are. I think they are used during pilgrimages. And there are different Hindu gods who have those different prayer beads in Hinduism. So that's some there. The thing Gigi is asking: do you agree the definition given by the Genocide Convention of what constitutes genocide? Do you mean Geneva Convention? I would have to look at the definition, but I think I would. I'm just going based off of my basic understanding of looking at all of these historical events, like I do as a historian, and seeing them as a genocide. So I look at the Holodomor, I look at the Holocaust, I look at Mao's genocides, I look at the killing fields of Cambodia and Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge of the 1970s. I look at the Armenian genocide, which totally did happen, by the way. Um, and I see those as all examples. I don't think large scale displacement, as horrible as it is, constitutes a genocide necessarily. Um, what country currently has the best land for war? I think Russia is dominant just because it has so much land. I think China is obviously very strong. The United States has got a lot of different types of terrain that make it really, really hard to defeat. And two underrated ones are definitely Israel, with its very vast, diverse topography, which has allowed it, especially with the possession of the Golan Heights, to defend itself from some of its Arab enemies, and Afghanistan, which mountain ranges and crossroads between Asia and the Middle East have allowed it to defend itself from the British, the Russians, and the Americans. So yeah, Eric, it is indeed interesting stuff. I do my absolute best. So thank you very much for saying that. I appreciate that. Texas, great to see you. Can you touch a little on the history of Russia-Ukraine conflict and how long it's been happening? Oh, England. Yeah, Caleb. Sorry, I'm gonna go back to your question, Texas. Caleb, yeah, England's definitely hard. I mean, that's why Napoleon never conquered it, but the Romans were able to conquer it. The Russians were conquered too. The United States, you could argue, was conquered. Um, the interesting, but yeah, I don't know about England. It's not huge, but the fact that it's an island and it's isolated, and there's several different islands like the Isle of Man, the Isle of Wight, and of course Ireland, make it a hard place to actually subdue. And the Romans were able to subdue the English, but they were never able, the Celts or Britons as they were called, but they were never able to subdue the Scots in Ireland, which is interesting. They were Scots in Ireland, what they called Hibernia, or the Picts in Caledonia, which is now Scotland. So yeah, England would be really, really hard to overwhelm. But Texas, basically, the Russia-Ukraine thing, I've talked about this on the channel before, is 1,000 years long in conflict because there is a tension in history between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Certain countries and areas have certain tensions that build up between them over the course of history that inform our modern understanding. So Vladimir Putin is not in the right in this war in any way, shape, or form, but he is correct to say that this is a centuries long conflict between the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians see themselves as distinct people from the Russians, and the Russians see the Ukrainians as distinct from the Russians, but feel they have a right to control the Ukraine no matter what, because the Kievan Rus, which was the first state in that region, emerged in the late 10th century AD based off of Slavic peoples and Vikings, led by a man named Rurik, who married and settled down. And Rurik's line became a series of princes out of the city state of Kiev or Kiev that became the Kievan Rus. So the Kievan Rus are a Russo-Ukrainian society that developed to include areas like Novgorod in the north, and of course Moscow in the east. And eventually, when Kiev is destroyed by the Mongols and the Mongols conquer this area, a group known as the Golden Horde, Russia is going to emerge as the independent city state, then called Muscovy, and later the Russian Empire. So Russia is the predominant state in that region of Far Eastern Europe, and eventually will go back into Ukraine and officially conquer it, splitting it up with the Poles in the 1650s, and then conquering Poland in the 1700s. So for centuries, the Ukrainians are dominated by the Russians, despite the fact that Russia really doesn't get started unless you have a Ukrainian state in Kiev. So the truth of the matter is, Texas, that conflict has been a back and forth where the Ukrainians want independence and the Russians aren't willing to give it to them. During the most recent chapter of that, before Putin, the penultimate chapter was the Soviet Union and the Cold War. And the Soviet Union was not just Russia, it was Russia and a series of Soviet socialist republics, which became countries like Belarus, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, which were incorporated later on. And of course, the Ukraine, which was incorporated early in the 1920s. So the Soviet Union of Socialist Soviet Republics included Ukraine, and Ukraine was obviously part of the Soviet Union. So Russia had a dominance over the Ukraine during the Cold War that ended with the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. After this, Ukraine all of a sudden had this new independence that the Russians had never seen coming, and that has bothered the Russians in their imperialistic ideology that has been implanted to them through both religious means and the means of Vladimir Putin. At the same time, the growing influence of NATO, which was originally created to be a bulwark against Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, has made the Russians feel very self conscious. Yes, NATO is not ostensibly there to stop the Soviet Union anymore, but it has created a common European political alignment that is usually anti Russian. And now it wants to include, it has already gotten Poland and Finland into that, which are very close to Russia. Now it wants to include Ukraine, and Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, definitely wants to be part of NATO. And because of that, the Russians are extremely incensed and extremely worried. So, um, yeah, I hope that answers your question about the Russia-Ukrainian war and their conflicts. So, yeah. Nithin, it defines genocide as any of 5 acts committed with intent to destroy in whole, a part, national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Yeah. So based on that definition, most wars are genocides. So if we want to go with that, then yes, I would say that the Native Americans were in fact victims of genocide, but so were many other groups in many other wars. I mean, Henry V committed genocide when he took over Paris and forced the French to surrender during the Lancastrian phase of the Hundred Years' War in the 1410s. So, yeah, Nithin is mentioning that genocide can be defined as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole, part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And I'm saying if we're going to assent to that, then yeah, we would include many wars in history to be genocides. Alexander the Great, who I just did my video on, was indeed a genocidal maniac by that definition. In his quest to destroy the Persian Empire, he genocided them. Texas, thank you so much. That's very nice of you to say that. And if you guys like the history you're learning about, if you're new to the channel, consider liking and subscribing. And if you're not new to the channel, please like so that the algorithm can get us some new people in here. Yeah. Eric, great to see you. Thank you for joining us. And if you have a comment, question, or topic you'd like to talk about, any of you, please drop it in the chat. Caleb, is it true that some gas masks used to have asbestos in the filter? Asbestos was a common building material and insulation and insular material that kept things warm or comfortable for a long time in human history in houses and cities and areas and urban developments. So yes, many buildings and I believe gas masks did have asbestos in them. And now, of course, we know how toxic that is. That can lead to many cancers, including mesothelioma, which, if you have been damaged by asbestos and are a victim of mesothelioma, you may be entitled to financial compensation. And yes, it is non-flammable. So it was cheap and easy to use, but nobody understood that it caused a rise in cancer, which is obviously something that human beings have become more concerned with. I was hearing something that when you hear that someone in ancient times died of natural causes, that's usually cancer. And that might be true. It might be interesting because ancient doctors wouldn't have been able to identify it as well as modern doctors. So modern technology, modern medicine, and also the development of modern industry and the pollutants that come from that and manufacturing and the materials used in those synthetic creations could easily lead to a rise in cancer. Oh, you were an asbestos inspector. That's really interesting. So asbestos is one of those modern uh, um, creations that allows life to be easier, but also makes it much more risky that people will be getting cancer. And cancer is more easily identifiable than it was 300 or 400 years ago. Um, Interesting. So asbestos is harmless until you. That would make sense because you're exposing in the material. It's like coming out all of the particles. Yeah, that makes sense. Texas. Interesting. I did not know that. Yeah, I mean, I lived in a house with asbestos at one point, so I know what you're talking about, at least in part. And it's the releasing of those toxins and contaminants that can endanger human beings at very high rates. So now that we're talking about that happy topic, as I take another awkward reach over to grab my coffee and take a sip of it, if you have a comment, question, or topic you'd like to discuss, please be sure to ask about it. And I need to charge us. So interesting. I'm going to do this. And I'm going to just go and plug us in. I'm going to have to undo my mic to do this. But you're going for a little ride through the Friendly Neighborhood History studio that I have here. And I forgot to charge my phone, so that's why we're in this position. So I'm going to be off my mic for the rest of it. So if the audio doesn't sound as good, I apologize for that. Um, and let's see here. If you have a topic, question, or comment you'd like to bring up, please do so as I plug in. Hold on a second. Hopefully you can still hear me. My microphone's off because I plug into the jack that I use for my charger. So that is why I'm doing that. And I'm charging. And I Love Music is great to see you. I Love Music is one of my Patreons, so you can tell them about all the fun stuff we have there. In case anyone here is interested in becoming a free Patreon member or subscribing for a fee for some extra material, even beyond just the bonus content that's already on Patreon, early arrived releases, and all of that stuff. Can everyone hear me okay, by the way? Am I coming in clear? Okay. All right. So hopefully you're hearing me a little bit better now. I turned off my Bluetooth because I got headphones and those automatically connect, and I'm also now charging. So yeah, if I have Bluetooth going, it automatically connects to my earbuds, and if I unplug, I'm talking through my earbuds, which are in another room. So that's why you can't hear anything. It sounds like I'm at the bottom of the ocean. But now hopefully I'm coming in clearly without the earbuds. But if you guys have a history topic or question you would like to bring up, please be sure to do so. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and thank you, M, very much. Appreciate it. It shows some love to my moderator, M, who does a great job holding down the chat and has agreed to 2 hours tonight. So I know that's difficult for him, guy with a baby on the way. So, yeah. Anyways, let's see here. Eric, asbestos is a naturally occurring rock or mineral. Where does it come from? Like, where do they usually find it? Do they mine it? I'm actually trying to learn some things here. And I learn things all the time. People correct me, people tell me about things I didn't know about history, and I've grown a lot. I didn't know what Unit 731 was until I started doing these live streams and stuff like that, or the Lavon affair. Simon the Bunny is not with us tonight, but we all miss him, and hopefully if he's watching this, he is doing well, and we enjoy his presence. And I'm joining you from ancient Greece, by the way. I love music because of my video about Alexander, which you had early access to on the Patreon 3.5 hours before it debuted here on YouTube. So it's mined in Canada mostly. All right, there's another reason the United States wants Canada. Cheap building materials that also cause cancer. Jeez. Yeah. So when you're done with this, by the way, go ahead and watch the video on Alexander the Great. It's about 10 minutes or so. That was a lot of fun to make. And I'm doing one every Friday and Mondays. They debut at 8 p.m. Eastern. I usually would do my long-form videos more sporadically. So I'm getting into more of making long-form content, making it stick, and giving people an opportunity to watch long-form videos about different historical topics and issue and content there as much as possible. I'm sorry, I keep looking over my lights over there. So actually do have lighting in the room that I can turn on to just give us a better feel. There we go. So now I'm back with regular lighting instead of just my own light. So just kind of turn the overhead lights on. But yeah, you've got long-form content every Friday and Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Start your week and end your week with some friendly neighborhood history live streams, but also some interesting videos and stuff. Alexander the Great today, and Monday, dropping early on my Patreon, by the way, will be a video about Christianity in Japan, something that a lot of people don't know about, but is very, very interesting, a fascinating historical phenomenon, as Japan has been extraordinarily adverse to foreign influences and is very worried about it, be it Asian or European. So, let me see here. Nathan is saying, how did Clement Attlee align so closely with Churchill during World War II? It's actually the Conservative Party in England, in Great Britain, that actually was hesitant about continuing the war. So after France is knocked out of World War II in 1940, the British have this fascinating choice, and John Kelly wrote an amazing book called Never Surrender. You should all check it out. If you want my book recommendations, John Kelly, he's Never Surrender, and Lucy Wooding's Tudor England, two great books about England. But basically, the British have this choice of staying in the war or dropping out, and Churchill chooses to stay in the war. And this is hated by many of the people who are in the Conservative Party, like Edward Halifax, basically the defense secretary, and of course the former prime minister who had sought appeasement, Neville Chamberlain. This is hated by them, but the Labour Party actually supports Churchill and is extraordinarily skeptical of a far right in Germany and the Nazis. So that is why you have that is why Attlee's war policy was similar to Churchill. He obviously disagreed about domestic policies and things like that. And Churchill stood in the gap against even committing political suicide because of his hatred of the Nazis and his fear of them. Churchill recognized the threat of the Nazis in the early 30s, just as he recognized the threat of the Soviet Union before, during, and after World War II. Yeah, let me see here. Texas Mine Company sent me to Jamaica to work steam house and aluminum mine pipes inspection and sampling. That must have been interesting in Jamaica. I would love to know more about Jamaica. I only know the most rudimentary things about its history and culture. And it would be tantamount to a historical stereotype when I know about that wonderful island. Woa, did you read the Newsweek article about the new COVID virus they found in China? No, I did not. Is it another SARS respiratory illness similar to COVID, or is it more of the avian bird flu stuff we're hearing about? I honestly think, just giving my perspective as a historian, people run out of things and are very, very impatient, especially in modern societies. And whereas medieval peoples dealt with plagues all the time and really, really suffered with them all the time, the public's propensity for putting up with an illness that does not kill at an alarming rate and does not even hospitalize at an alarming rate, such as COVID, especially compared to the bubonic and black plagues, which were killing 50% of the population in some areas. People don't have attention spans or the patience for quarantines and for following advice that they did in the medieval period. And also they didn't have a choice. They got it, and they were oftentimes going to die or suffer horribly. with COVID, there's a much higher survival rate. There's a much better chance of not being horribly mangled by it, unlike the Black Death. And so I think people have a lot less patience for hearing about new viruses, and I think there's going to be less attention paid to any new sort of COVID or any sort of new super virus or potential pandemic causer like the avian flu, and monkeypox and RSV were two examples where the diseases seemed to be pretty bad, but people really didn't take them as seriously as COVID, and people don't take COVID as seriously as they took COVID. So things change and people change, and the short attention span, especially of Westerners, have led to these viruses being considered less and less serious, and basically people refusing kind of by default to go through the same masking and social distancing and restrictions that they did in the early days of COVID. It is interesting. Texas, you must have had a good time in Jamaica. I hope you really enjoyed it. And Freshly, I'm sure you wish you were there. So, well, true, I guess we were lucky to be alive this time. We are, but it's not even that. I mean, there are diseases that can obviously kill at a much greater rate that we just don't encounter, and part of it is modern science, antibiotics, and things like that. But yeah. So I hope you enjoyed what I just said, a little bit of cultural commentary, comparing this COVID experience to the one in the past. And I see Harsonet. Harsonet is another friendly neighborhood historian. Thank you for joining us. What do you think the future of the Middle East may look like? Well, that's a tough one. I don't know about U.S. occupation of Gaza. I've heard that the Egyptians and Arabs are scrambling to make that happen. I think you're going to have large amounts of displaced Palestinians living in certain countries in the Middle East, perhaps Saudi Arabia. Great to see you, by the way. I think Israel's going to, as long as the Republicans are in power in the United States, despite the neo-isolationism of the Trump administration, Israel's going to continue to have a huge support there. And I think Israel's going to grow in its influence and power. And I think that the PLO in the West Bank may be more willing to wheel and deal and create a two-state solution. I have no idea what's going to happen with Syria. I am very leery because any sort of removal of a dictator, be it the Shah of Iran, Saddam Hussein, or Hosni Mubarak, led to huge, and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya led to huge issues that continue to affect these nations to this day. So I don't know if it's going to be any different. Bashar al-Assad was obviously an awful individual in so many different ways, shapes, and forms, but I don't know that Syria will be better served without him in the picture. So we'll see exactly what that looks like. I don't know if Israel is becoming a Middle Eastern superpower, but I think that it's going to increase its influence, and I think it wants to increase its chances of survival and safety. And when you're a tiny country that is hated by everyone around you, I think that there will be more. You're going to want to do that, but I think there's going to be more works towards natural normalization of relationships. I think it'll be more expedient if the United States does indeed start basically harvesting as much oil and natural gas as it can. Basically saying screw off to OPEC and to Saudi Arabia and to importing oil and natural gas, and screw off to the environmental agenda, then I foresee that region of the world that Saudi Arabia will become desperate for economic ties and advantages with anyone, including a more wealthy state like Israel, because Israel is wealthier than other Arab and Middle Eastern states. So I think the Saudi Arabians may want to wheel and deal because they don't have a choice, because they're losing a huge exporter with the United States. And that's assuming that Trump doesn't put tariffs on Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, I need to look into this, being a presidential and U.S. historian, but I don't think the president of the United States can put tariffs. He can put emergency tariffs or fines or things like that, but tariffs are taxes, and taxes need to be passed by Congress. He needs a tariff package if he wants any sort of lasting sticking with this. So, as for Iraq, I see ISIS just kind of hanging out there, and that area being a power vacuum for a long time to come. I think Saudi Arabia is increasing in its influence and power, but if the U.S. does go energy independent, it may need to go cap in hand to other powers. And I don't see the Palestinians getting their own state anytime soon, unfortunately. And I think the actions of Hamas, especially in the last day with the releasing of that hostage, but the killing of his family, just show just how broken that region is. Can you preach about the Victorian age? Yeah, I've talked about it a lot, done a couple of videos on Queen Victoria you might want to go check out in my British monarch series. But basically, Queen Victoria, the Victorian age is basically seeing Britain being one of the most powerful influences in the whole world. It actually had the largest empire in history. It isn't the largest contiguous empire because it's all over the place, and England is only a small island. But it had Ireland, Canada, Australia, large sections of Africa, India, Burma, um, basically controlled Afghanistan, controlled Hong Kong, had a huge influence over China. Britain was the predominant power in the world in the 19th century. It even had land in Guyana. So, and it even claimed areas in Antarctica. I mean, it never really was able to establish it, but the British Empire controlled 6 of the 6 relevant continents in the world, or at least controlled large swathes of them during the late 19th and early 20th century. And then after World War One, which I consider to be World War II, they increased their influence by taking over large swathes of land in the Middle East in places like Iraq. They took over Iran and basically allowed the Pahlavi family, Reza Shah, to take over that land. And also administrated the British Mandate of Palestine. Those mandates are areas where the British were basically in control of foreign policy. So their influence and power spread throughout the entire world. And the Victorian age, that's the political and economic side of that, because that obviously made them extremely wealthy, exploiting their colonies. They also brought infrastructure, education, and culture to those colonies that didn't exist before then in certain areas, while also, of course, exploiting the natives and treating them as though they were lesser than them based on ethnic and racial stereotypes they had. Basically, the idea of many of the civilizations during the Victorian age was, we've won, therefore we are better in every way, shape, or form, and these people are ethnically and culturally worse than we are. And that kind of domineering attitude of hating your colonies, yet also needing your colonies, was common in the British, French, and German empires of the late 19th century during the Victorian age. In Britain itself, it was a time of romantic poetry, with people like Elizabeth and Robert Barrett Browning writing these beautiful love letters to each other. And at the same time, it was also called the Victorian Age because it was the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. It was a whole style of art and architecture. It was very conservative in its ideals, with people usually going to church, women dressing modestly, and formal courtship rather than lasting relationships. And so there was a formality to it and a style to it, and that was seen by many as the best in the world at the time. And Queen Victoria, despite being a figurehead, was indeed the figure that the whole world looked to as one of the most powerful, influential, and important women, not just in that period, but throughout all of human history, which is absolutely 100% true. So, Harsonet, there's just a little bit about the Victorian age. I love music. Trump seems to be taking the U.S. to a new isolationist ideology in a strict sense. Yes, we were just talking about that earlier. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, he's a neo-isolationist. I think he doesn't feel that except with Israel, he's not a neo-isolationist with Israel. I think he feels a strong desire to get the U.S. in. He thinks it's had its fingers in too many pies. And I would argue, and I think this is true, that the U.S. is drunk off of the successes of the 2 world wars of the 20th century, where U.S. intervention was able to be the tipping point, and usually for moral good. But I think after the Korean War in particular, the U.S. has kind of trailed off. Its intervention in Central and South America led to the destabilization of a lot of areas, which has caused mass immigration, which has only come back to bite the U.S. in the butt. At the same time, you also have, which that's not the only reason for that, there's other reasons: lack of economic opportunity, poor social systems. Those are all common, unfortunately, in those areas of the world, as well as drugs and crime. The U.S. also intervening in the Vietnam War and then trying to export democracy to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, which are not built for them in any social or cultural way, are also foolish examples of U.S. intervention. So I think perhaps the overreaction from the Trump administration is neo-isolationism. And when you've got people like Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk bending his ear, you're going to get those policies. And so that's why you're going to see them taking the brakes off of Ukraine, and slowly but surely, maybe they'll even take the brakes off of Israel, give Gaza back to the Israelis after that land is rebuilt, which the Egyptians and Arabs are scrambling to do, and then basically let the Middle East alone to some extent. Interestingly enough, last weekend, Trump said Hamas had until this time to release the hostages. I think it was last Sunday. They had till noon Eastern. They didn't do it. Trump said Israel got the green light, and no fighting broke out. So maybe that area is coming to an end, and Trump will pull out of that region as well. Nathan, how did racial superiority thinking differs or is similar in Imperial Japan, the Nazis, the Indian caste system, the U.S. South? Oh, geez. I think there's, at the core, to quote Kendrick, at the core, it's they not like us. And they not like us means they not as good as us, because it's assuming that your group is the good group. So this is part of the human condition, which is an underpinning part of history in general. And so because they not like us and they is inferior, therefore they are wrong and we are right, and they must be wrong in every way, shape, or form. So a racial or cultural reason for that is the development of things like the caste system, the segregation system, or the Japanese basically kicking out all foreigners and executing as many Christians as they possibly could in the early 17th century under Tokugawa Ieyasu and the Tokugawa shogunate. Whoa, what's the history of historians? That's called historiography, and that's where you can learn about different historical perspectives and how they develop over time. Texas Repo, the Brits are indeed tough. Harsonet, do you think the new English dialect from immigration and hoods in American cities is cool? I mean, I think it's interesting to see how language changes and is based on different developments in culture. Something that's really fascinating to me in studying the dialects of African Americans versus white Americans or Caucasian Americans is that in Southern culture is more even part of it. Yes, intonation and voice sounding is different. If I was African American, even if you were just listening to a video I had done, my voice would sound significantly different than it does now. I'd still be speaking English and probably with the same pronunciation issues, but it would sound different. And I think it's easy for people when they're watching a video, even if they don't know the ethnicity of the narrator, to know that he is black, white, or Hispanic, or Asian, especially in the United States where people like this are common. And of course, accents are different and men and women sound different, so there's that too. But the truth of the matter is, a development of a certain dialect is usually based on cultural ties, and there was a strong cultural bond developed between Southerners and African Americans, obviously during the time of slavery and even afterwards, and that was influenced by cultures that had developed in northern England, Scotland, and Ireland that was far less developed in its understanding and grasping of the English language than the southern parts of England, which settled the northern parts of the United States. So southern English people were the Pilgrims in Plymouth Colony, William Penn in Pennsylvania, and stuff like that. Northern Englanders, Irish and Scotsmen, were the ones who settled areas like the South, like North and South Carolina and Georgia. So their dialect was less developed, their comprehension of the English language was less developed, and that was then inculcated in their slave population. Texas Repo, open border, maybe. I don't know about that. That's an interesting. It's a tall ask for a historian to solve an immigration issue when the United States is just jam-packed full of immigration issues throughout its history. Something I have proposed kind of lightly, based on my historical understandings, obviously, is a return to an Ellis Island-like system. You can have a sealed border and you can have deportations or whatever you want, but you also need to make the legal immigration system more easy to access. The United States lets in more immigrants than any other country, and that's just legal terms, and it's more than the next three combined. It's incredible how many immigrants the United States accepts every year, but the legal immigration process, we're told, is very slow and daunting, especially compared to the large number of people who want to immigrate to the United States from all over the world. That needs to be made a little bit more expedient. And that needs to have a vetting process and all of that stuff, and maybe a return of an Ellis Island-like system would actually work a lot better. And that way you would have less incentive for people to cross borders illegally. So that would be that's a historian's guess. You can have a strict immigration policy while also having an efficient immigration system. And that was what was the case with Ellis Island. In a century's time, what will the Elizabethan age look like in history? I love music. That's a great question. I love that question. I mean, I think that people really are inspired by Shakespeare and stuff like that, and I think there's a certain regality to Elizabethan England that's not going to go away anytime soon. But I think fewer and fewer people are reading Shakespeare, fewer and fewer people are taking an interest in that area of the world, and so I think that will become less common. Something that I talked about in my Substack article, so if you want to read it, please subscribe to my Substack, from yesterday, was history from below, from above, where I feel there are historians who want to take the emphasis off of white Westerners, which is perfectly okay, and talk about the experiences and difficulties of third world peoples, which is perfectly fine, but they're doing it just through the negative lens of condemning Westerners rather than actually celebrating and enjoying the culture of the third world peoples who they are learning about. So we can, what if I told you could learn about both African oral traditions and the Elizabethan English theaters of the globe and things like that? So I think we need more balance as we become more diverse in our understandings of history. What do you what do you think of the decline of typographic thinking? I don't know much about that, Woa, so I'm not qualified to speak on it. You might want to explain it maybe a little bit more, and then I can give you a full answer. Texas, our country is $36 trillion in debt. The dollar will be worthless if we keep printing money. Yes, basically, that has happened throughout many civilizations and empires, such as the Yuan dynasty in China and the Roman Empire, can attest to the fact that an empire collapses when its money is basically worthless because of inflation or hyperinflation. And if you don't want to take their word for it, take Weimar Germany, for instance, where wheelbarrows full of money in the morning would buy you bread and in the afternoon wouldn't buy you a crumb. So I understand where people are coming from that perspective. Carson, do you agree that Calvin Coolidge was the best president? No. I think he's in. I'm going to make a list. I talked a lot about presidents. I have an entire video where I talk about the best and worst thing about presidents. I did a lot for President's Day earlier this week. I think Coolidge is a good president. I think he's underrated. There are several presidents that are underrated that we don't talk about enough, and we really should. I mean, James Monroe is a great example of this. William McKinley and Calvin Coolidge are some of my favorites. But I think that Coolidge did not understand that the credit loaning was not a good thing, and that the vast usage of that was actually hurting the economy. And Herbert Hoover was one of the people who tried to warn him. And Hoover said over and over again, and I agree, I didn't cause this depression. I'm just stuck with it. And Hoover didn't know what the heck he was doing, and that's why he's one of the worst American presidents. I'm not saying Coolidge is overrated. I think he's underrated, but I'm saying there are certain things that keep him from being the best. It's a very big what if. Coolidge's son died by developing an infected blister by playing tennis on the White House courts, and Coolidge was so stricken by this that he refused to run for another term, although he could in 1928. This is before presidents could serve less than 2 terms, but it would have been a second term anyways, because he had succeeded a president who died before him, Warren Harding. Coolidge had been pretty successful. It would have been very interesting to see what he would have done with the stock market crash. Probably not very much, but who knows? Coolidge was an adept man and a pretty reasonable man, and one of those good leaders who's very quiet. And so who knows? He might have been able to actually solve some big problems. I don't know if he would have solved the Great Depression. His policies didn't necessarily cause it, but his negligence didn't help it. Do you actually think the United States is able to collapse? Yes. Trump is the best president of my lifetime. Well, that's an opinion. Opinions are like navels. We all have one. I'm not going to say... I would do a presidential ranking video, but it's just going to get so controversial when I have to rank the presidents probably after Nixon. Because before then, you can be like, hey, he was good, he was bad. And it's like, oh, those policies aren't directly affecting us. But yeah, now it's like, yeah, what do you think? And if you say Reagan's an A or a D, then you're a this or a that. So... or if you say Trump or Bill Clinton or someone like that. I try to be as fair and objective as I possibly can. Yes, well, that's definitely true. There is less interpersonal communication. Calvin Coolidge's predecessor, like Roosevelt, with too much government intervention prolonged the Depression. His negligence was better than progressivism. Yeah, you're thinking of, well, predecessors and Teddy Roosevelt, but successor. Franklin Roosevelt. Yes, Franklin Roosevelt did not solve the Great Depression, and if I were to talk about overrated American presidents, Franklin Roosevelt's on that list. Franklin Roosevelt refused to pass anti-lynching legislation. Franklin Roosevelt was a notorious philanderer. Franklin Roosevelt put hundreds of thousands of Japanese people in camps because they didn't look white enough. He didn't do that to the Italians and the Germans, just the Japanese. Wonder why? Franklin Roosevelt turned back a ship of Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust, even though his wife begged him to take them in. They were sent back to Germany, and we don't know what happened to those poor people. Many of them probably died. Franklin Roosevelt didn't solve the Great Depression. He might have even prolonged it, and it was the war that solved the Depression, because it's easy to say there's no unemployment when everybody gets drafted or is working in a factory to make war bombs. So, I love music. History is a discipline where one cannot dismiss the bad in lieu of the good, dismiss the bad in lieu of the good, whether black and white, all lenses are valid. History is not just about right and wrong, it's bears its wounds. Yeah, and I think you can garner wrong and right from history and good and bad from history, but that doesn't mean that you stand in judgment, because someone's going to stand in judgment of you. Columbus did a lot of horrible things. Columbus did a lot of interesting and good things too. I don't want people to look back on me and think of me as just a racist who was an oppressor. But people just do this automatically about people in the past without even bothering to care about the context in which they lived. And I don't want to be looked at that way. I don't want anyone else to feel that way. So I'm going to judge somebody in light of the context in which they lived. And yes, that means I'm going to do that for people who were absolutely brutal and awful. And I think it's easy to say that the Aztec priest sacrificing people was brutal and awful. Stalin was brutal and awful. James Buchanan was the worst American president and an awful individual and never should have aspired to the nation's highest position. That's fair to say. The Nazis, scumbags, all of that. It's easy, fair, and right to say that. But give the context, explain why, make an argument, and not just take somebody who has a whole person and just simplify them to one thing. Something I got pushed back on my video about the presidents was I kept saying the founding father presidents were slave owners. And I was saying, well, you're not giving the context of when they lived. And yeah, I do know the context of when they lived and why they were slave owners. Madison, Monroe, Washington, most of the early American presidents were slave owners. But the Jefferson, of course, obviously very notorious, slept with a slave and refused to free her and had illegitimate children with her, and she didn't become the first lady, and the children didn't get freed even after he died. So those are stains. Those are terrible, terrible things. But the reason I kept mentioning those as the worst things about him was because those are the worst things about him. Their presidencies were actually pretty competent. People were wondering, why are you talking about their personal lives and not their presidential administrations? Because sometimes the president's personal life bleeds into his administration. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, how many terms? Let me see here. So I Love Music, I absolutely agree with you is what I'm saying. Texas Repo, how many terms did FDR get as president? 4. He has the record of 4. He died early in his 4th term. Would have served 16 years had he lived his full 4 terms out. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't people have to focus for 3 hours during presidential elections? Yeah, there was that, and it took people a long time to actually count votes and stuff like that, and the easier it got, and the more easy it was to communicate and to travel for presidential candidates, that's why they moved the inauguration date of a new president from March 4th to January 20th. Harsonet, what president do you think did more than Calvin Coolidge? Most presidents did more than Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was extremely passive. If you mean in terms of accomplishing more, Lincoln, Washington, Jefferson, if I want to go with more modern ones, Reagan and Clinton. The economy did not crash as soon as Bill Clinton left the White House. Ronald Reagan stopped the Soviet Union dead in its tracks. That's more than Calvin Coolidge. I don't dislike Calvin Coolidge. I'm not saying he's a bad president. I think he's underrated. He might be a B tier, maybe close to A tier, A minus definitely, is probably where I would go. Joshua, in your opinion, who was the greatest military strategist of all time? Look at the map. Alexander the Great probably is the only one because he was basically undefeated in 13 years. What defeated him? Drinking too much and his own soldiers. Harry Truman, that's a good one. I think Napoleon, obviously, I have an obsession with Napoleon. I've done a lot on my channel about Napoleon. I think I would pick him as my favorite military commander. He's probably the best general on the field, but Alexander has the cleanest record. Yeah, Harsonet, he tried to stack the Supreme Court after Congress, after they blocked several of his legislations. And Eisenhower never fought a day in his life, but was an extremely adept commander, of course, with D-Day and the decoys and leaving Patton in England just because he didn't want him around and all of that stuff. So we've gone almost 90 minutes of the 2 hours, and though we haven't had a large crowd, we've had a lot of fun and great interactions and a lot of great questions from a lot of wonderful people and wonderful friendly neighborhood historians, so I really appreciate all of that. I'm going to go for a few more minutes if we get some more questions. If not, I'm going to cut everybody loose and we'll end a little bit early, but join us tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another hour of this, where we'll hopefully get a bigger crowd. But thank you, everybody, for all of your great questions. But does anyone have more they would like to talk about and discuss? Things they want to run by me. Woa, can you tell me about Nikola Tesla? I think he was Serbian? Czech? I think he was Serbian. He was an inventor who came to the United States, and Tesla coils. He obviously figured out, and he patented many inventions, but he figured the best thing he figured out was that electricity the best flow for electricity was alternating current instead of a direct current. And I don't know enough about electricity to tell you that, but he won the electric wars through deciding that. And he's obviously one of the most brilliant people who's ever lived, and is obviously compared to Thomas Edison because of their competition between alternating and direct current. Okay, do you think Rutherford B. Hayes was a good president? I think Hayes gets a bad rap. I've done videos. If he gave the South the ability to run their own states at the end of the Reconstruction period, that they would behave and be nice to him and would give blacks their equal rights, and he was shocked when it didn't happen. I think he was naive in that regard. I think he meant well, and he had a lot of strong characteristics, but I just don't think he was an extremely effective administrator. I think he's mediocre. We all know generals during World War II on the Allied side: Patton, MacArthur, Montgomery. But who do you know? Do you know any of any on the Axis side? Yamamoto, the naval commander of the Japanese, is obviously perhaps the greatest admiral in human history, one of the most successful. He did not want them to attack Pearl Harbor, and if he had gotten his way, Japan probably would have won the war. The British probably would have surrendered and lost at least Burma. And obviously, on the German side, you have to talk about the Desert Fox himself, Erwin Rommel, one of the most successful military tacticians of the 20th century, who just got outproduced by the American military-industrial complex that cut its teeth during World War II, or should I say World War III. And I know M loves it when I say that, because in my opinion, there have been 3 world wars, not 2. But basically, I think that he is an excellent candidate if you're going to talk about great military generals during that time. Those are 2 of the most well-known: Yamamoto for the Japanese, and Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, well-known for his tank warfare in North Africa, almost ground the British down. If it had not been for Patton, they could have gone really, really awry. Harsenet, Guidelines, Mainstein, Brock, Rutstedt. Yep. The Germans have a lot of great generals in World War III. I love music. Do you think we will ever see another golden age of invention, say as in the late 19th century period? I think that was a leap forward. I think we're in another leap forward now. We've got Jobs, Bezos, and Musk, and those are billionaires, but those are also huge inventors. I think that we are in the middle of that with iPhones. I talk about technological development a lot on this channel. The exponential leaps in human development and technology over the last 2 centuries dwarfs the 5,800 years before that in recorded human history. And in the last 30 years, that dwarfs the previous 200 years before that. So we are on a huge ascent at breakneck speed, and it feels like we're going to crash into technological oblivion soon. But good question. Harsenet, look, the Reconstructionist area was already going to die during Grant, and Grant gets a bad rap for that. States' rights was the only thing Hayes could do. Yeah, Hayes was kind of at the end of his rope. Grant's corruption, if Grant had just been a better judge of character, Reconstruction might have worked out. He did crush the Ku Klux Klan. He did get the 14th and 15th Amendment, the 15th Amendment. He knew, which allowed blacks to vote. He knew what to do. He wanted reparations. He wanted the Freedmen's Bureau to reshape the Confederacy, the old Confederacy, into an egalitarian society. He wanted all of these things, but the political corruption of his cabinet allowed the Democrats to gain more political power in Congress, which limited Grant's effectiveness. His own scandals ruined his reputation, and of course the Democrats gaining in Congress made it really hard for him, and that's why he wanted to come back in 1880. He's one of the first presidents to seek a 3rd term, and one of the first presidents to seek a non-consecutive term. The first president to ever seek a non-consecutive term, by the way, was Martin Van Buren, who ran in 1848 on the Free Soil Party after being president. To seek a non-consecutive term. Yeah, not a 3rd term. He'd only had 1 term. He wanted to come back in 1848 after his failed 1837 to 1841 bid. What's the history of Luxembourg? I don't know a huge amount about Luxembourg. I think it, like Belgium and the Netherlands, is kind of developed in that 19th century fray where there's these border states that are put up between France and Germany so that they aren't always attacking each other in wars. I don't know how and why Luxembourg is its own sovereign nation, but I think it's supposed to be this kind of buffer zone between Germany and France, and obviously shares, just like the Belgians and the Swiss, a huge amount of its culture with both societies. No, that's definitely true, Harsenet. Grover Cleveland, the president who was elected to non-consecutive terms, the only one until Trump, was basically guilty of assaulting a woman and her having his child and her not consenting to any of it. And Maria Halpin, it's a horrible story. A president who definitely would have gotten Me Too'd had he lived 130 years later, and definitely should have. I love music. Yes, if only Nixon had a better judgment of character. History tells us what a brilliant mind he was. Way underappreciated. Yeah, Nixon is an underrated U.S. president. He was a conservative who knew how to toe the line with moderate policies. He did his best to end Vietnam. I was talking about this earlier. But his big failure, obviously, was Watergate and his own hubris. If he had apologized for Watergate, he may have survived. But yeah, Nixon's an interesting guy. And today is the anniversary of when he went to China. And I talk about that on my daily history video. Do I have a Nixon background that I can use right now? Never mind. I'll do that later. So I don't know about Nixon being set up. I think Nixon did what a lot of politicians do. He just got caught at it. And the problem, glorious content with Nixon, wasn't that he wasn't just the Watergate break-in. It was the idea that the president is above the law and can do whatever he wants, even spying on his political opponents. In an election that Nixon won 62% of the popular vote in the biggest landslide in American history, probably. But remember, I am not a crook, right? Let me see. Do I have a picture? And I would say that Nixon is comparable to, of course, this man. I think that Trump and Nixon have a lot in common. They have both been maligned and have had criminal investigations, or have been seen as corrupt and worthy of criminal investigation. And the truth of the matter is, I think that Trump and Nixon are both guys who feel that they have been cheated by the system. Nixon thought he lost the 1960 election and that was stolen from him. Trump felt the same way in 2020. Both came back and won during times of huge upheaval. In 1968, Nixon won his presidential election, defeating the vice presidential candidate of a Democratic president who had stepped out of the race. In 2024, Donald Trump won his second term. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme a lot, by defeating the vice presidential candidate of a president who had stepped down. Lyndon Johnson stepped down because of Vietnam. Joe Biden stepped down probably because of his ineffectual foreign policy, just like Johnson, but also because of concerns about his age. And Trump won that election, pushing a law and order candidacy and a stabilization of America's foreign entanglements. And that's how Richard Nixon won the 1968 election, too. Both of these men came back, made huge political comebacks. Nixon felt that after he lost the 1962 gubernatorial race in California, that he was done for. Trump seemed like he was done for when this happened, when he got convicted of the 34 felonies, the mugshot, all of that stuff. That seemed like the guy was done in for. And yet, look at him. He's back. He's in the White House. It's the greatest presidential comeback. It's the greatest political comeback, at least in American history, because believe it or not, this mugshot was less than a year ago. And of course, everybody remembers this. And this, a lot of people thought should have done him in. So Trump probably did a lot more of it he got criticized over than Nixon ever did. Nixon was already seen as corrupt because of the Checker speech and because people thought he had taken bribes and that he was too strong in the McCarthyism and anti-communism of the 1950s. Yet Watergate was during his presidency. Trump had this happen at the end of his first term, and then all of the other stuff with him doing the 34 felonies right before he got reelected. So just some interesting stuff, and history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And I should do a longer form video about how Nixon and Trump are very, very similar. But yeah, and a lot of people think Trump was set up just like Nixon was. Do you think the War of 1812 led to the U.S. Civil War? Not directly. I think that the Harsinet's asking, do you think the War of 1812 led to the U.S. Civil War? I think that, obviously they both happened in America, but they're so far apart. There isn't real. I think it's the Mexican-American War, the new territories, and the question of slavery spreading to them or not spreading to them, or banning slavery in those regions, which Lincoln wanted to do, that led to the cessation of the southern states being part of the United States, and of course the Civil War. Harsinet, I'm not trying to make Trump seem bad. I've been very fair to Trump. I've complimented him. I did a video about Kash Patel today, making history as the first Indian FBI director, and nobody seems to care about this. Or Scott Bresnett being the highest-ranking LGBTQ official. Why doesn't anyone seem to care about this? Why is the media so blind to any of Trump's accomplishments? Trump walked into the demilitarized zone of North Korea without bodyguards, the only president to do that while sitting. And it's just, he does have this incredible, amazing amount of guts that is admirable, and people should acknowledge more often. And I've been pointing out media blindness on this issue, which is why I did my own series of videos analyzing the presidential election of 2024 from objective a perspective as possible. So I'm analyzing Trump as a historian. I'm not doing it like all of these historical channels that think that they're so great by basically crapping on him all the time. When he does something interesting, I'm going to talk about it. When he does something that's historically relevant, I'm going to talk about it. I probably will make a comparison video between him and Nixon. Me comparing him to Nixon, by the way, is not an insult. It's not an attack. It's just me saying the two are very, very similar in many, many ways. And I think there's a level of resentment towards criticism and enemies. And I think Nixon was hounded by the media just like Trump is, and often unfairly. So, yeah, history just is. It doesn't tell us how to live. It's like science. Science tells us what we are. History also tells us what we are. And that's why it's a science, a social science. I love music. I think you're absolutely right. And Harsonet, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm not saying Trump is great or that Trump is terrible. I'm just analyzing him as a historian. When he does something bad that's historically ignorant, I'm going to talk about it. When he does something interesting, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to do a video at some point about Trump's historical perspective, because it's a very interesting interpretation of historical events that sometimes is very accurate and sometimes is just way off. A great example of this would be his assessment of the McKinley tariffs, renaming Mount Denali Mount McKinley. He has a high opinion of William McKinley, as do I. He has a high opinion of the McKinley Tariff Act of 1891. I do not. I think that ruined the American economy of the 1890s, along with America going off a gold standard. Arsenal. Well, after the War of 1812, the 2793 Fugitive Slave Act became constitutional about the 50s, which, yeah, that Fugitive Slave Act was born out of the Compromise of 1850, which was trying to settle what would happen to the territories that had been won over during the Mexican-American War. So the Fugitive Slave Act of the 1850s reinforced an earlier Fugitive Slave Act, but if that Fugitive Slave Act had remained as lax as it had, the Civil War might not have necessarily happened. It was the Compromise of 1850 that reinforced the laws around that Fugitive Slave Act. So, but anyways, now we're back in ancient Greece and stuff. So, we're 101 minutes in. It's been a lot of fun. An hour and 40 minutes. I don't know if this is our record. There have been times where I've stayed over to answer questions and done stuff like that, but this is a special live stream, special Q&A, and I've definitely felt very special throughout it. And I thank all of you for making it as special as it has been. Yes, Millard Fillmore is a terrible president. We can agree there. I think we agree on a lot of stuff. So, yeah, the only good thing I could ever say about Millard Fillmore when I did my video was that he was a good lawyer. That's basically it. The guy did not know how to be president. Most guys in the 1850s knew nothing about the presidency, and it was interesting that America was blessed with Lincoln, who knew just how to be president at the right time in the right way. Freshly Wild. Why does Aristotle get a bad rep? Speaking of Alexander's instructor, I think a lot of people like Platonism. I think Platonism has become a dominant philosophy in the West. And if you know what I'm talking about, and I'm not a philosopher, but philosophy is part of history. It's a friend of history in many ways. The truth of the matter is that Aristotle is Platonism was one of the dominant schools of philosophical thought that kind of embraced a dualism in which, or at least the idea of another dimension where things are more stable and in their perfect form. And this became popular in Christian and Western thinking thanks to a man named Augustine, Saint Augustine, in the early 5th century, who basically preached these ideas of this perfect universe and dimension existing in heaven with God. And this highly influenced Catholic and Western thought, and is more based in rationalism and using thinking to develop, to find truth, rather than empiricism, which focuses on observation. Because for Plato, the real, true, perfect form of a thing is in another dimension somewhere. For Aristotle, his student, in contrary to his teacher, the real form is inside of a thing. So the real perfect Friendly Neighborhood History channel for Plato would exist in another dimension, perfected. For Aristotle, the real form of that is in the Friendly Neighborhood History channel itself. So Aristotle gives birth to a lot of empirical thoughts that become popular during the scientific revolution, whereas Plato is extraordinarily influential in the development of classical Christian thought that influences the West and the development of political and philosophical systems in the United States and in worldviews. I have a very good friend who has a YouTube channel about philosophy who would be more qualified to speak on this, but just going off of the history of these regions and everything, the development of Christian thought is highly influenced by Augustine, who is highly influenced by Plato, and of course, the idea of a perfect dimension and perfect form fits very well with the Christian notion of heaven. So it obviously develops a lot of weight in the Christian West. So that's why Aristotle gets a bad rep freshly, but he's obvious. It's obviously because he's counter to Plato, so he's counter to Aristotle and to Augustine and all of these thinkers. But Aristotle doesn't get a bad rep nowadays, and many people love the idea of living virtuously and living good. I mean, Jefferson puts in the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence because that's an Aristotelian idea. The pursuit of happiness is not just feeling good about yourself; it's virtue and all of that stuff. So, Texas, can you speak about the Spaniards and which countries they colonized? It's easier to tell you which countries they didn't colonize, but the Philippines, large sections of the western United States, New Mexico as it was called, New España, which later became Mexico, Central America, and all of South America except Brazil. They originally colonized all of the Caribbean, lost places like Haiti to the French and Jamaica to the British. Yeah, so large sections of the world have been colonized by them. Thank you, I love music. I definitely have earned a cigar. And where is my cigar? I will have it later tonight. I just ordered a box of cigars. I got a big discount, $20, and I'm really looking forward to it. I don't smoke. Please smoke responsibly. I don't smoke in my new studio because it's, even though it's kind of open air, but I still smoke pipes and stuff like that in my car and stuff like that. So, religions of, by the way, give M a round of applause. He's done a great job as moderator tonight. Please put in the social media handles if you haven't. Again, please, M, thank you. Religions of ancient Greece. Well, obviously, you have a development of a polytheistic system, which is basically a bunch of stories pieced together through mythologies, which help them explain exactly why their society is the way it is in ancient Greece, and it's almost different, and you have city-states developing them differently. This religion is spread, by the way, through Alexander the Great, who my video was on and why I'm having this background for my map, as he conquered the Near East and the Middle East in the 4th century BC. But Greece obviously adopts Roman religious practices, which are similar to Greek religious practices, and eventually Christianity goes there, Judaism goes there, Islam even goes to Greece eventually, and I'll explain that in a second. But basically, as the Roman Empire is Christianized, Greece is Christianized, which is a process that lasts in the last few centuries, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries AD, until Theodosius in 380 makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Greece is part of that, so Greece is now a Christian nation. Greek Orthodoxy develops in Greece as separate from Roman Catholicism in the centuries that follow, because the Christian bishops and leaders there do not want to recognize the Roman Pope or Bishop of Rome as the leader of the Christian church, and they also speak Greek, which is the original language of the New Testament and was the lingua franca of the Roman Empire, where Christianity had been created in Palestine and spread. So the troop, by the way, Constantinople is just off of this one. It's right at that ipsis. So at the upper right of my background is the Dardanelles, and that is where the Thracian society was that was eventually conquered by the Romans. The Greeks couldn't quite conquer them. They were warrior tribes. And at the isthmus, at the end of that isthmus known as the Dardanelles, is the beginning of the Black Sea. And so the Black Sea, the Aegean, and the Mediterranean are all connected through that canal right there, or that land, that strait right there, right by Constantinople, which is now Istanbul in modern-day Turkey, which was the seat of the empire that succeeded the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, which included Greece, which was a strongly Christian nation, and in this case, Greek Orthodoxy became the predominant religion. When the Ottoman Turks showed up and destroyed Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, and eventually conquered Greece in the 15th century, they spread Islam into Greece. And the Greeks remained extraordinarily resistant to this, and nationalism was basically born out of the Greek Revolution of the 19th century, where Greece became its own independent country in 1832, and Greek Orthodoxy remains the dominant religion in that land to this day. But Christianity, Greek Orthodoxy especially, are the most common religions in that region over the last 1,500 years. And by Harsonet, cigars ruin your lungs, meditation is better. You can do both. I can meditate while smoking a cigar or smoking a pipe, and cigars do not ruin your lungs because you don't inhale. The glorious content. It was pretty easy to choose Aristotle in this. Yeah, Aristotle's a really fascinating guy. I love Aristotle. I love Plato too. Definitely. Could I be a YouTube moderator? Harsonet, at some point, yes. I usually wait for people to just keep coming to the channel and just wanting to redirect the chat, encouraging people to like and subscribe, stuff like that. So the more you do that, the more I'm inclined to do that. And M is wonderful. Simon the Bunny is wonderful. Rodolfo is wonderful. Matt G is wonderful. I've got some great moderators. Rattlesnake, wonderful guy. He's got his own YouTube channel now that I hope he's working on. I've got really, really great moderators. I can't make everybody a moderator, but maybe in the future we can make that happen. And there you see all of the social media handles, by the way. Patreon's where I've got bonus content, and my Substack articles where you can read me if you don't want to hear me. And if you want to have a nice interaction in depth with me, please email me, friendlyneighborhoodhistory1@gmail.com. Amos, great to see you. Better late than never. What was the teapot scandal? Are you referring to Teapot Dome? Teapot Dome scandal, Harsonet, is referring to the U.S. president that I referenced earlier, Warren Harding, president from 1921 till he died of a heart attack, which I think his wife poisoned him in 1923. Basically, his secretary of Commerce was selling land to an oil magnate friend of his in the Teapot Fields, I think in Wyoming or North Dakota. And that land was supposed to be government land that was sold to privates, that was being sold off, which is not illegal, but the fact that it was being sold to an associate of a government official in the cabinet was a huge scandal, just so that they could make more money from the oil. So, and the government owns huge amounts of lands in the western United States, most of which they use for environmental conservation and preservation, such as, of course, Yellowstone and Yosemite. But that land was sold off to an oil baron so that he could make a lot of money, and and obviously some of that money was funneled back to the Secretary of Commerce. I'm trying to remember his name, but the Teapot, it's called Teapot Dome because the Teapot region, the Teapot Fields were used where the oil was found, and I'm sure it has some sort of shape that is reminiscent of a teapot. Yep, there you go. My pleasure. And that's how we do history here, Friendly Neighborhood Manor and all of that great stuff. Amos, I hate to do this because you're just joining, but we're going to be wrapping up in a couple minutes. We're nearing 2 hours. This is our record, our longest live stream ever, 111 minutes. I appreciate everybody for coming and staying and all the great questions and topics you brought up. I'm going to do last call. If anyone has any more topics, comments, or questions they would like to bring up, I'd be happy to answer them for you. And I just really appreciate all of this. And we will be back new time, 6 p.m. We're going back to our old time for our Saturday afternoon Q&A. Do you ever laugh? There, I just did. I laugh. I laugh plenty. I try to make other people laugh. I enjoy humor and things like that. And I find the more I enjoy humor and the more I learn to make other people laugh, and the funnier I get, the less I laugh, because the less impressed I am with other types of humor, because you got to really work at it. I love absurd types of humor. So if I'm going to listen to somebody, I'm going to listen to Norm Macdonald, and he's going to make me laugh because he just comes out of nowhere. But yeah, I do try to laugh. I try to be, I hope that I'm friendly. I hope that I'm friendly enough, even without it. And yes, thank you. I love music. This is our anniversary, by the way. So if you're just joining us, this is the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. This is our year-long special 2-hour Q&A, Ask Me Anything about history and social studies. You're joining us at the very tail end of it, but we are growing. We are almost 6,600 subscribers, Friendly Neighborhood Historians. We've got over our legion. My goal is 10,000 by the summer, and we're working on it, and we're getting there, and we're getting closer and closer every step towards monetization, and that's why I'm doing the long-form videos twice a week now. Long stream. Yeah, friendly enough. I mean, hopefully not too boring though. I mean, I'm nice about it. I try to be enjoyable and affable with people, and not get mad when people say rude or mean things in the chat, or insult my personal appearance or stuff. I'm probably a lot uglier than the people who insult my appearance are claiming, so they're being nice probably. I had one guy come into the chat and just was saying, "Oh, I'm just here to I'm just gonna trash this guy. I'm gonna end this whole guy's career." And he actually liked some of my response, and by the end actually subscribed and said it was quite interesting. So that's what Friendly Neighborhood History means. It means delivering this history in a way that's friendly, like you're talking to your neighbor. and actually enjoying the history that you're learning, and hopefully not being too far above your head with big long words. You can read my Substack if you want big long words, but also communicating to in a way you can understand, and also welcoming you and being happy that you're here and enjoying your participation, as I definitely do when you are here, Harsonet. And thank you for having my back. Really appreciate I Love Music, who is a longtime subscriber and Patreon, and I just really, really appreciate everybody. We've got 1 year down. We've got many, many more to go, and I hope you can stick along for the ride. And the ride continues. The next stop on our train tracks are 6 p.m. tomorrow for our next Q&A, where you can ask me anything, and hopefully one of you can email me a topic that I can do on my live stream lecture on Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Really looking forward to that. I will do one more last call, since that was not exactly history related, but a very nice question nonetheless, Harsonet. Any last questions, topics, comments, concerns, feedback about history or social studies? I don't want to say you're free to go, because you're always free to come and go as you please here, as I take a much needed sip of water. And again, make sure to show some love to M for doing a great job tonight. Battle of Little Bighorn? Yeah, good topic. That's definitely a topic that I could do a live stream lecture if you want me to do my lecture on it. I could do it on the Indian Wars of the late 19th century. Obviously, the Sioux Nation, it's not one tribe. It's a series of different tribes. The Cheyenne, the Lakota, these are different Sioux tribes. They were a group of tribes known as a nation with some of the same architecture, backgrounds, and behaviors and stuff. But basically, the Little Bighorn, the Sioux people were doing their absolute best to resist government infringement onto their land. The army had been hesitant to actually crush the natives. It was the Little Bighorn where George Armstrong Custer basically went in with ill-advised ideas, thinking that the Sioux were going to be far less in number and ferocity, and was basically surprised and completely annihilated by them in one of the strongest displays of Indian independence in American history. And basically his arrogance and hubris got him in there, because if he had waited for reinforcements, he probably could have handled it, but it would have been from a general, and he wouldn't have gotten the credit he deserved. This arrogant cavalry officer from the Civil War was trying to make his bones in the post-Civil War Indian Wars that were very common in the 1870s and 80s. And yes, it would be a cool stream to talk about the Indian Wars. M, what do you think of the plane crash in Canada? I don't know enough about it. It's very interesting. Was it Delta? I keep hearing about Delta. There are so many plane crashes these days. It's awful. I just hope everyone's safe out there. Yeah. I Love Music. That sounds like a lovely, lovely evening. Coffee and an apple fritter. And Angel, thank you very much. I am sure you are absolutely beautiful. Or handsome, or whatever adjective you would like. We're all beautiful on the inside. Harsonet, thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening and a great weekend ahead, and I hope that weekend includes joining us for the live stream lecture on Sunday, and also tomorrow's Q&A, where I will be talking more about history and social studies related stuff, and I may not be joining you from ancient Greece. Maybe I'll be joining you from my studio with my light working and my battery fully charged. We're up to 37%. That's pretty good for me. I'm notorious for not charging my batteries. I'm that guy, by the way. All right. Hope you have a great and wonderful Friday evening, and a happy weekend to you all. TGIF, take care, and we will see you again very soon. And remember, as always, love history. Bye-bye now.